Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Fat Muscle Project podcast. I'm John Gorman, one of your hosts today. We've got Miss Lisa Franz in the house. Lisa, what's going on? How are you?
Hi, John. I'm doing very well. What about yourself?
Well, I'm geeking out over here because, as we were just talking about before the podcast started, this is a guest I've been wanting to do something with, whether it's speak at an event, have a podcast, both YouTube videos, something for over a decade now. So, Dr. Stu Phillips, welcome to the show, man. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Yeah, this is going to be fun because we've worked with quite a few researchers, and I would consider you one of the people at the very top, especially in the things that we're interested in, which is physique enhancement. And I'm going to go ahead and throw the word aging in as I get ready to turn 49. You are
Yeah,
an expert in so many areas and so highly respected. If people don't know who you are, can you give a breakdown of who you are and what you do?
sure. I thought you were going to say because I was aging, I was an and I am too, and I'm north of 49. So, yeah, I'm a professor in the Department of Kinesiology at McMaster University. We're located in Hamilton, Ontario. That's about 35 miles outside of Toronto, about 60 miles from Buffalo, New York. But we get way less snow than Buffalo. I know, lake effect thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've been here for this is my 29th year.
And give me an idea. Wow, 29 years, which
I
is,
know. I know.
so I'm going to be careful not to take us off the rails because I'm real big on asking people about the different things they've changed their mind on. So maybe we'll try and say
Oh, sure.
for the end because that could be a whole podcast in and of itself.
Yeah.
What got you into wanting to research the human body and the way that it can change, nutritionally with supplementation, with training? What got you into that?
Yeah, I'll compress the story because I've told it a few times, I'm sure. But I did an undergraduate degree in biochemistry. I really enjoyed science, like from day one. But I was an athlete when I was an undergraduate. I played rugby, but rugby, football, ice hockey. So the harder you could smash somebody, that was my sport. Um, and in my senior year, I broke my leg before the season was supposed to start, and I couldn't play rugby. And I was really bummed out because we had a great team and yada yada. Uh, and so somebody said, "Well, you could pick up like a fourth year senior thesis." And I was like, "What's that?" And they said, "You work in a lab and you do research and everything." And so I did. And it was I don't know if it was an epiphany moment, but literally I got into the lab and I started working and doing research, and I was like, this is amazing. And then literally in the last semester of my senior year, I took a course in nutritional biochemistry, and I was like, this is amazing too.
Yeah.
And the rest is kind of history. I applied to work with the woman that taught me the senior nutritional biochem course, and she introduced me to a guy who studied muscle. And there are lots of times along the journey, and I'll be frank, I thought, you know what, I'm just going to go to medical school and become a physician. But I was really enjoying what I was doing, even though I wasn't making any money. But if money and enjoyment are they're the two sides of the coin, right? If you're doing it for money, power to you, that's great. But the enjoyment part sure makes up for a lot of I'll just call it lost time and money. And still to this day, amazing to be able to do what I want to do, and work with young folks who are equally as enthusiastic and keep me feeling younger.
Yeah. There's something I want to say here. And I think it's important that I say this and that you hear it. There are people in the industry, all different sides of it, right? But the research component of this that are very good at what they do. And then there's people like you and a few others that have moved us light years ahead. Because whenever I used to think about research, the old quote saying was research is 10 years behind what the bros think,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But you are someone that have moved us so much farther ahead, so much faster. So I just want to say thank you because you don't get to pick the brain of someone that's moved an industry forward. And that's just if you would have became a physician, and worked in the medical field, that could have been awesome. But I don't know if you maybe you could have had the impact, but the impact you've had on all of us, I just don't want to understate that. That is so vastly important.
I
Um,
appreciate that. Those are very generous words. Like I always say this, and I'll sincerely say it again. I'm a product of the people that surround me: hardworking students, hardworking undergrads, hardworking postdocs, great friends, great colleagues. I look good because of what they do. So you see me here, behind me, or literally, actually, two floors down, and if you are a group of people that they do the hard work. They put the time in, and I just bask in their reflected hard work. So, but thank you. Those are very generous words. I
yeah,
appreciate
yeah,
that.
yeah. Well said. I want to start this off by asking, what's something new that you're working on, or something that you're super excited about in our space?
Yeah, so two things. My wife, who for coming up 30 years now, she's a cardiovascular physiologist, and we have great dinner table conversations. And she's pushed me a lot over the last 5 or 6 years to broaden our horizons. And, hand on heart, I can honestly say is that we spent far too much time studying men, and not enough time studying women. And so we have four clinical trials on the go right now that are exclusively in women. And, that is exciting. It's opened up a whole new world for me, a lot of the other guys in the lab, I'll be honest with you. And so get me back on in a couple of years, and I'll tell you about heavier and lighter loading in young women, perimenopausal women, and heavier and lighter loading and higher protein postmenopausal women. And
Yeah.
yeah, so that's exciting. It's interesting. I really hope that we can contribute some worthwhile information to those fields. And the whole aging space is intriguing to me. People throw the term longevity around. Not that I'm not a fan of longevity, but I think what people really are after is health span as
Yeah.
opposed to longevity. So the healthy period of your life, and beginning to sort of shape some really core ideas about what are the core components of that. And a lot of that comes from reflection of about working with older people who tell me stories, and I just listen to some of the things these people have done in their lived experiences. I don't know, maybe it's a sign I'm getting older, but I find it fascinating to listen to their stories. So yeah.
You bring up menopause. We are lacking so much research in the muscle building, fat loss side of things. I know
Yeah,
Bill
yeah,
Campbell's
yeah, yeah.
working very hard on that end.
Yep.
He spoke at our event last year and just absolutely crushed it. He's so passionate because he wants to help his wife, right? So what
Yeah,
way to
yeah.
want to jump in? Is that something I noticed you had a YouTube video up not long ago in the menopause space? You were interviewed, and I can't remember who it was by, but it was really good concept. Is that
Thank
something
you.
you're looking to maybe get a little bit more into, is the menopause side of things?
Yeah, so we have a study in perimenopausal women that is just getting started, but we've enrolled, I think, our first like 12 participants. We have a study that's just about to finish in postmenopausal women. And again, with again Bill's mission and to help his wife, and again, no lived experience, but watching my wife go through it, looking from the outside in, I was like, holy shit. That's a lot of stuff that I had no concept on. And yeah, it's a challenging time, particularly for women who I think are trying to do all the other things that men have been doing. I'm fond of saying that if men had to go through it, we'd have commissioned a global task force and tried to solve this thing, God, centuries ago. When we were just told to put up with it, right? So times are changing. That's good. The discussion's happening, and the research, will hopefully do a service to all the women out there who are looking for answers, because it's hugely confusing. And a lot of that is just lack of information, and some of it is sort of, disagreements. And I think that's not a bad thing. I think that's sort of the early stages of, discovery in this space, which is saying something that in 2026, we're beginning to finally maybe understand some of these things. So pretty
Yeah.
big deal going on there.
Yeah, looking forward to hearing more about that. I've got one more question for you, and then I will turn it over to Lisa because she does a really good job of keeping us on track. My
Awesome.
question for you is where do you think, let me see how I worded this here. Look at my show notes. Um, Blending research and bro science. Okay. So I am a self-professed half bro. I've always been super interested in thinking about, well, what if this worked? And then I apply it to
Yeah.
myself or
Yeah.
or my people in the trenches, my clients, if the
Yeah.
research isn't there, right? So like how important is thinking outside the box to coming up with future research? And have you ever looked at kind of the bro science and kind of some of the stuff out there and thought, well, that would make for good research? I'll give you a real quick example.
Yeah.
Back in 2011, 2012, I was doing these massive refeeds with my clients.
Yeah.
And it became kind of a hot topic on Facebook at the time.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
had no research on refeeds or high carb days, leptin, or any of that stuff. We
Yeah.
just thought, well, we should boost metabolism and do all these things, and they were way too big. But it ultimately led to the first refeed study that I got to write the diets for with Bill at University of South Florida back in
Yeah.
2017. And I thought that's the ultimate bro science meeting
Yeah.
science. And it led to our first refeed study, which was awesome. And it showed how beneficial they were.
Yeah.
What do you think about the blending of bro science and research, especially in the climate that we're in now, where everyone can get educated so fast? Do you think there's a way to blend that?
Absolutely. I mean, I would be insincere if I said that, some of the stuff that we'd embarked on wasn't sparked a little bit by bro science. In some cases, to push back against the bro science. In a
Yeah.
couple of cases, to support some of the things that we saw were being done. And we were like, do you think there's anything to that? I'm fond of I don't know if I remember the right version of the movie, but it's a Men in Black scene where Tommy Lee Jones is picking up a copy of The Inquirer and everything else, and it's like alien spotted here, and Will Smith says, "Why are you reading that?" He goes, "This is the best guide to what's actually going on." So, as an avid reader of a lot of, I'll call them bodybuilding literature,
Yeah.
a lot of times I was like, is this real? Is this something that, maybe we should do some research over this. So I think, that's where, the science is 10 years behind what the bros are doing. But, the truth is that experimentation, particularly around training protocols, that's been going on in gyms for, decades and is probably somewhat further ahead. And I'm fond of saying, I'll put something out about a study on training manipulation, and somebody will rightfully say, they go, "Oh, Arthur Jones was right." And I was like, yeah, yeah, he was pretty much spot on. So, we're proving a lot of what the bros have found. But I think to your point, more maybe in the nutrition space, we've probably, I hope that we've helped shape some folks' thinking where there was a true knowledge void. In some cases, though, we've just been like, yeah, 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 you guys had it right. That's fair.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, we have to be careful too. And that's why I love about seeing research that proves something wrong, especially
Mm,
because there's a lot of charlatans out there. There's a lot of people trying to make money off of certain things or approaches that aren't just necessarily backed by science, especially in this world of social media influencers and YouTube celebrities and people like
yeah,
that. There's a
yeah,
there's an important role for research to play there, especially
sure.
for people's health and just their knowledge, so they don't take advantage of. Can you think of anything that you've done research wise or been involved in that's kind of shed the light on something that said, oh, that's not necessarily true. This is true. Maybe BCAAs or whatever you can think of that maybe you were involved in?
Yeah, I think there's two areas that I would probably go back to. There was a popular theory, probably most popular about 20 plus years ago, that the acute rise in anabolic hormones, testosterone growth hormone, IGF-1, was a driver of muscular growth and hypertrophy. And now these hormones go up, they go up for probably about 30, 40 minutes, then they come back down. And everybody was like, these are causative in hypertrophy and muscle growth. And we did a series of studies and a lot of cross-sectional examinations of data. And I want to say that I think we firmly debunked that. I think that most people agree that the rise is too short. There's no real meaningful impact these hormones have. And then kind of the nail in the coffin, although we didn't do the work, was looking at a cross-sectional comparison of relative gains in muscle mass between men and women. And even though women start out with less muscle than men, is that everybody relatively speaking gains the same amount. So, that kind of debunks the notion that it's a testosterone driven process. Now, anabolic steroids, and everybody goes, but I'm like, those are, you know, two, three, four standard deviations outside of what I'm talking about as a normal physiological range. So, I think that's a popular one that we've sort of, hopefully pulled the covers back and said, not that big a deal. And the other one is on the loading scheme. And even Brad, who you've had on your show, and you said, and he's a good friend, he's a great guy, would probably admit the first time we published a lighter load versus a heavier load, but both done to fatigue, we're like, we don't think there's much difference. And he was like, come on. And then he did his own study and he found the same thing. And, credit to the guy, he was like, I was wrong. You guys were right. And we
Yeah.
never got into it to rewrite training manuals. We basically just said that there's lots of probably different ways to kind of, lift weights that are going to end up, converging in, you're going to build some muscle, you're going to get stronger. At the very end, the sort of squeezing of the cloth phase, I call it, those last few drops of water, clearly there's room for some very nuanced programming. But as I'm fond of pointing out to people, unfortunately, less than 30%, if that, of people engage in any sort of strength work. So, and as I get older, I'm fond of saying that I think a de rigueur part of aging is being, as strong as you can and as powerful as you can, because that's just basically, such a core component of aging well.
Yeah, I love it. Lisa, do you have any questions for him before we kind of really get into the show notes?
No, I think this leads really nicely into one of the topics that we did want to talk about, which was the heavy and light loads. So maybe you
Yeah.
can kind of dissect that a little bit for the listeners in regards to what does that actually mean, also in terms of rep ranges or application,
Yeah.
strength versus hypertrophy, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I think that people are sort of familiar with the textbook figure is, somewhere down here is two repetitions, like so, not the one rep, but like you can do it twice, and then somewhere down the other end of the spectrum is sort of, I'll say 25 repetitions, and there's quite a big difference. These are heavy loads, these are lighter loads, but you're still reaching fatigue. So here the reason for fatigue, you can't generate force. You physically can't generate enough what we call strong cross bridges inside your muscle to, pull the muscle together. And up here, it's more metabolically induced fatigue. You're accumulating lactate, there's potassium coming out of your muscle, and I would say it's painful.
Yeah.
We're all familiar with the fatigue here. We all know this one as well, I think. Most people prefer to sort of live down in this zone, right? So, and there was this sweet spot in the middle of between 8 to 12 repetitions that was the hypertrophy zone. When we saw that, and again, I live with people who study biomechanics and EMG and everything, and I said, but at fatigue, shouldn't all motor units be engaged? And they're like, yeah, with, some have dropped out and everything, but the definition of fatigue is that you're trying to drive all the motor units. So your brain is saying, switch everything on, try and recruit all the muscle and generate the force. you still fail, whether it's here or here, but when you go to task failure or that last rep, maybe somebody's got to spot you, maybe not. But you rack the weight and you're like, whew, I'm done. We were like, I don't think it would matter that you're in this sweet spot. And effectively that's what it's not, and it's not just us. Ourselves, Brad's group have shown it. We've got now these meta-analyses of multiple different studies that have shown it. In other words, the hypertrophy that you get, the muscle growth is somewhere, probably starting around 3 repetitions to anywhere as high as I might go as high as 30, but I'm going to cut it off at say 25 and say if you're reaching momentary muscular failure in there, you're going to grow muscle regardless. It's going to happen. So the sweet spot is actually much bigger than we thought. The
I mean, that's
strength
awesome
that,
news.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, which is, it's sort of carte blanche, right? But I think Brad's take on it is a good one, and he's spot on. Like we didn't get into this to rewrite training manuals at all. We were just we're always thinking about mechanisms. How does hypertrophy happen? And his point is, well, why stick in one range or another? Train with a variety of different ranges. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds great. You know, um, the strength adaptation is that you do get better at lifting heavy loads when you train down here versus up here.
Yeah.
The reason for that is because you practice doing it.
Yeah.
So, when we give people up here the opportunity to practice, so in other words, every 3 weeks they do a 1RM test, these people get equally as strong. So that comes back to the principle of specificity. The living embodiment, I wrote it the other day because people were talking about training hand grip strength, which we can get into. And I'm like, that's like training for the NFL combine. Like if you want to get better at the combine, you train the 40-yard dash, you train the vertical jump, and you train 225 to failure, which used to be a strength test. But now when guys are repping out at, 40
Yeah.
plus repetition, it's an endurance. It's well beyond the strength component. But, to make the point, you get better at what you practice doing. So if you lift heavy weights, not surprisingly, you get better at lifting heavy weights. But hypertrophy wise, the continuum is not that 8 to 12 is a poor range to choose by all means. And I get that it's in the middle and you could call that sweet if you want because it's not too painful, but it feels like it works and it does work. All we're saying is that it's a lot wider than you probably once thought.
Yeah. And I want to ask a question for our coaches, and this is also coming from me. When we're talking about specifically muscle gain, not strength gain, not
Right.
anything like that, but just specifically muscle gain. In that range of 2 reps to 25 to 30 reps, right? Where does volume fall into this? Because this is what most coaches are thinking, and this is probably the biggest fucking
Yeah.
worms ever, right? So
Yeah.
on volumes, I just want to get your take on this because I know
Yeah.
volume's different for everybody. It depends on what
Sure.
they can recover from. But do you feel like volume is different in the heavy rep ranges versus the high rep ranges? Because my thinking is, if I am going to have someone train in the higher rep ranges, I'm not going to crush their nervous system as hard as if they're training, 2, 3, 4, 5 reps to failure. But where does volume play a role in that when it comes to hypertrophy?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I almost knew that you were going to ask it because it's the logical follow-up.
Yeah.
Volume is of all of the variables, and when I talk about volume, it's load times reps per set times sets times number of times you're training per week. So I just call that volume load or
Yeah.
other people weekly tonnage or whatever you want to call it. So it's something in pounds or kilos. That's the unit. Um, you can do more at lighter loads. You can just lift more volume. And so that's what is obviously compensating for the heavier loads that you're lifting in terms of driving hypertrophy. But to your point, I think that it bears consideration is that when we look at all of the variables that drive hypertrophy, the one that really stands out clearer than load, clearer than sets, is volume.
Yeah.
In other words, you have to accumulate a sufficient amount of volume, which is probably why the 1 to 2 RM folks, like if you're just pulling a weight once and then walking out of the gym doing it for a few lifts, you actually don't get that much bigger. You get bigger by doing a little bit sort of lighter load and accumulating a little bit of volume. So volume is important. And the training is the art and science of balancing A, what people can handle, B, what's the training goal, and then C, essentially, again, feeling the athlete out as to, and you've experienced this with clients. Some folks, they come in and you're like, okay, we're going to try this. And they're like, "Kung, kung, 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 kung." And they're like, okay, what's next? And you're like,
Yeah.
feeling good. And then 2 days later, they're like, bring it on.
Yeah.
And, they're, I don't know what it is that they have. And whereas other folks are like, halfway through the workout, they're like, I'm done.
Yeah.
Maybe they are, maybe they aren't.
Yeah.
But at least their perception or their feedback to you as the coach is, I'm done. And when you get to work with some really good athletes,
Yeah.
they've got amazing physiology and they've got some diabolical
Yep.
mental toughness.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, run through the wall, comes back, goes,
Yeah.
anything else? You're like, and when those get fused together, well, you're seeing it in Milano Cortina in the Winter Olympics. It's
Yeah.
it's it's not even normal. It's almost pathologic, the amount of pain and everything they put themselves through. But that's the fusion of the two. The coaching is literally the art of the application of what I'm talking to you about, though.
Yes. Yes. And that I have one more question. So if we're talking about the difference in training with volume, if you compare bodybuilders to powerlifters, obviously
Yeah.
powerlifters get much stronger because they're training in those, but bodybuilders are quote unquote doing more volume. If you look
Yes.
at how much more muscle, there's a much different look, but there's just
Yeah.
more muscle mass on a bodybuilder.
Yeah.
I would have to equate that to doing more volume because of a higher rep range that they're mostly
Yep.
training in. Would that be accurate?
Absolutely. Absolutely
Yeah.
spot on. I mean, I think it's also interesting though, and he's never going to win a bodybuilding competition, but to use, I think it's Eddie Hall, one of the like
Yeah.
strongman has,
Yeah.
leaned out in terms of his physique, and he's not a small guy either, right?
Yeah.
He looks pretty big.
Yeah.
So, it's possible through changing your physique body fat wise to show off a musculature that's obviously pretty well developed as well. So, but yeah, you shift your training depending on your goal. If you've got to pick up an Atlas stone, then that's what you practice doing. But if you want to, put on some muscle, look good at the beach, or realizing that that's an essential component of aging, you're going to lift and train a little bit differently for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Stu, you mentioned earlier, or when we're talking about heavy and light lifting, you mentioned in the end it comes down to tension, etc. But also you mentioned failure a few times, and so
Yeah,
I'm curious to hear: do we actually have to go to failure on all lifts, close to failure? How close to failure in terms of RPE,
yeah.
etc.? What's the research saying about that?
I've been trying to coach my students out of not using the word failure because failure means that you didn't succeed when actually,
Yeah.
fatigue, let's call it fatigue or momentary muscular failure or fatigue, whatever. But yeah, you hit you can't do the work. Brad's crew did a really nice job looking at this in studies where people have gone to fatigue and people didn't, and how close that you need to be. There's and you folks are familiar, repetitions in reserve. So how much gas you got left in the tank. You're working out in the gym by yourself, and I say to somebody, there's nobody there to rescue you if you can't push the bar off your chest or you collapse on the floor. So you don't need to go there. You leave a couple of reps in the tank, and the literature shows that actually that's just as good. In other words, probably those last like I said, it's like the last drops of water you're going to squeeze out of the cloth, um, aren't as important as a lot of people make out. And I know that there's a concept out there of so-called effective repetitions, and everybody says it's those last few that are effective. And I say, but what about the ones that got there? They go, well, yeah, they're important too. And I said, well, you can't get to the effective ones without doing the earlier ones. So aren't they all effective? Or, I mean,
That's a
they
good
certainly
point.
weren't ineffective, right? But I think to the point that, we're all trying to make is that, Lisa, you don't need to go to drain the tank. Leaving a little bit in reserve is okay. Leaving a lot on the table, in other words, you're like, "Oh, I could do 4 or 5 more, but blah, blah." You need to come close, but you don't need to go all the way.
And
Okay.
that
Yeah.
now here comes John Gorman brain again. You're gonna start taking us off track, or Lisa, yell at me if I'm jumping ahead in the
No,
show
I love
notes.
it.
But
Yeah.
so this makes me think of because we're most of our people are dieting, right? Most people come to us
Yeah,
because they need help dieting, holding on to muscle.
sure,
Sure,
sure.
we help some people gain muscle, but most people are like, I'm fat, I need to lose some body fat, hold on to muscle, help me.
Yep, yep.
That brings up this question then, and this is something I practice, but when someone's in a deficit and they're dieting, don't have to be a bodybuilder, but just someone trying to hold on to muscle.
Hmm.
Um, Training to failure every single set, because that's what a lot of people think they need to do from a hard work. Because if you're in
Hmm.
a deficit, you're under recovered. This
Yeah,
tells me training in that, 2 reps in reserve and 8 or 9 RPE, if you're saying that's effective to hold on to muscle or to grow muscle, then probably people dieting don't need to push beyond. They don't need to hit that 10 out of
yeah.
10 RPE because they're just going to under recover faster. What do you think about our thinking on that?
You're spot on. No, you're 100%. I mean, when you're dieting, as you say, it's an intentional deprivation of energy. We know that energy is important for recovery, so you can expect for recovery to take a little bit longer. People would struggle with the types of, I'll call it intensity, effort, whatever you want to call it. You said rating of perceived exertion or RPE, reps in reserve, call it whatever
Yeah.
you want. No, absolutely. I think that that's a very productive way of thinking about it and not pushing because it's not necessary. And I mean, cutting energy is tough enough already, and then we're gonna smash it every workout, and that's not needed. I will say that I think it's unequivocally true that the primary, and I mean absolutely primary driver of hanging on to muscle in an energy deficit is lifting weights.
Yeah.
And in the era of GLP-1s and people obviously manipulating their appetite, everybody's like, you need to eat more protein. And I'm like, that's such a distant number two to lifting weights. Like,
Yes.
yes, it helps, but it's literally, and my analogy is always, lifting weights bakes the cake, and protein is that thin layer of, icing on top. And
Mm.
I mean, I love icing, man. Like, who wants to eat a cake without some icing on it? But without the cake, it's just a layer of icing, and I'm not talking about a thick layer of icing either. So,
I
yeah,
I absolutely love that. And it brings up another point, and I think this is in our show notes. So when it comes to, well, especially people if they're not training, right? Especially in this GLP-1 driven society
yeah,
that we're in
yeah,
now,
yeah, yeah,
um, people that aren't lifting but they're dieting, obviously their muscle loss is going to become rampant. But most of our people listening, they are training and they're training
yeah.
hard, but they're worried about muscle loss. So this is
Mm.
a completely different question that goes off into this area. What's the amount that someone needs to do to hold on to muscle? Because so many people are scared of losing muscle. What's kind of that minimum? Like, what's the research say on that? I've always wondered
Yeah, yeah,
myself.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Great question. I wish I could give you a really good answer. The short answer is we don't know, but we've done two studies, the old-fashioned way of just cutting energy, no GLP-1s, pre-GLP-1 era.
Yeah.
One in premenopausal women who trained 2 days a week, and on a higher protein diet, they completely ablated or mitigated all their muscle loss. In other words, they essentially everything they lost in terms of weight was fat. So they were training 2 days a week. It was pretty intense, and they were novices. So, first time weightlifters for the vast majority of the instances. In the other one, the other study, it was in young guys. It was only 4 weeks in duration, mainly because the energy deficit was 40% below what they required. And everybody, like if you've never been there, everybody said, why didn't you do the study for longer? I said, because the guys in the study would have killed us. That's why.
Yeah.
If you've ever been 40% below what you need, it's hard. Like, and this is, pre GLP-1. So these guys were literally just, yeah, we were starving them for the most part. They lifted I think 4 days a week, and they retained just about everything. And I think that just goes to show you how powerful the stimulus that lifting is, and not to poo-poo exercise or aerobic exercise. Awesome. But hanging on to muscle requires a resistive stimulus, a loading stimulus. And from that perspective, like I wish, John, I could give you like oh, you lift this much or whatever, but I'm gonna stick with I'll say 2 days a week and a fairly good effort on each of those days. However you split that upper, lower, push, pull, et cetera, et cetera. That's the art of the training.
Yeah.
But 60% of your muscle is below your belt. So if you're not doing something
Yeah.
for your legs, you're going to lose some muscle.
Yeah, it's always been something that I've been super fascinating just thinking about, especially as I age and get older, multiple businesses, busy running, and I don't train as hard or as much with as much volume as I used to. But at this stage, I'm just trying to hold on to everything that I can. And I just haven't been able to kind of find that answer, even
I
though,
feel you.
yeah. Well, there was a post. I know we keep talking about, all the friends we have in common. Brad Schoenfeld put up a post. I wish I had this in front of me, so I'm trying to recall it. He had mentioned that they did some research, or he was quoting some research that was done on the difference in muscle gain with longer rest periods versus
Mm,
shorter rest periods. And
yeah.
I know I'm going to butcher this, so Brad, if you're listening, I'm sorry. I believe that it showed anyone that's resting 30 seconds or just shorter rest periods, the ability to gain muscle or hold on to muscle isn't as good as if you rest maybe a minute 30 or longer. Are you familiar with
Yeah.
any of that
Yeah, yeah,
research?
yeah. No, I think you're spot on with the interpretation. I can't remember too much of the nuance of the details, but effectively, I mean, one of the things with the hormone hypothesis was short rest periods because that really drove up the hormone response. And yet, as Brad was showing in that study, is that the longer rest periods actually resulted in, and I think like it must go to, recovery and the ability to do a little bit more work. And I'll call it, it's a loose term, but quality work.
Yeah.
And maybe the ability to be able to come back and do it again. I think it's a nervous system issue or something that's going on there. But to your point, yeah, I mean, it's almost a forgotten variable, right? Where I'm fond of talking to the athletes here and saying, all that training you do and everything, like that's awesome. All the good stuff happens as soon as you stop training
Yeah.
in the recovery period. And I get a lot of looks. They go, and I'm like, when you repair, regenerate, remodel, refuel, rehydrate.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, okay, I get that.
And
Such a
that's
good
that's
point.
why I'd love to see more research in that area of rest periods.
Yeah,
And I'll tell you why it struck home for me. Over the last 5 years, I've really changed my training to 30 minutes, 5 days a week, where I
yeah,
literally rest 30 seconds. I'm a busy guy that owns businesses and I'm just running and I just want to get my workout done. And I train hard, but for
yeah,
20 to 30 minutes, I can get a chest workout in and I'm done. But I've
yeah,
noticed my physique has drastically gone backwards over the last 5 years. No changes in hormones, food, all that stays the same. Aged a little bit, but most of my variables are the same. But I changed my rep ranges a lot over the last 5 years. And a lot of my clients ask me, hey, how much should I rest? And I've historically just told them, hey, if you need to get out of there, superset your stuff, rest 30 seconds and go. But now I'm looking at it differently. So I just bring that up because I think that's a whole area that I think could be important going forward, especially as we age, because that seems to be what most of us older folks want to do. Train high reps, try not to get injured, get in and out because we're all busier every year. I
Yeah.
don't know. It just is a very fascinating area for me.
Yeah, definitely plus plus on the try not to get injured. I mean, everybody says, what are you training for? I said, training for life, man.
Yeah.
I got three sons. They're all in their 20s. Like the days of being able to take them, those are over. I don't get close with them anymore. Um, it used to be to stay ahead of them. Now there was a deflection point, a few years ago. Yeah. I'm training to age well, training to be able to do all the things I want to do, hike with my friends, have vacations where, the activities are, things that are active not that I don't love sitting on a beach, don't get me wrong, but, yeah, I'm not real good at sitting around, so I want to be able to do all that stuff. So injuries are a major concern. So probably like you, I back off a lot of load so I don't get hurt, to be frank.
Yeah, and especially with the research that you've put out, talking about these higher rep ranges are very good at building muscle and holding on to muscle. To me, it makes sense as we age to not put that strains on our joints and tendons where, benching 5 reps is probably not conducive if you're 55. I mean, obviously, if you're trying to do a powerlifting meet, you got to do what you got to do.
Oh,
But if you're
sure.
just trying to live life like we're talking about, why not train 20 reps on a chest press machine instead, right?
Well, I can tell you that I travel a fair bit, and I'm fond of saying is that I find myself in occasionally a decent hotel gym, and I'm next to a younger guy, and usually I train by myself. And I'm like, hey, do you mind if I work in? And he's like, yeah, sure. But I'm like, I don't want to show this guy that I need to take some weight off this machine. So I try and do it. And then the next day, I think to myself, well, why'd I do that? Like I can't walk, my hips hurt or something. All because I was trying to show a guy 20 years my junior that I'm just as strong as. So yeah, I get 100%. I get it. Yeah.
So on the
Okay,
point
Lisa,
of
back on track.
individuality as well, that brings up that wonderful quote that you put into the show notes, and I'm curious what you actually meant by that because it says the biggest determinant of growth is not the program, it's the person. And John found
Mm.
this quote on one of your posts, I believe. Why do you say that, or how can we interpret that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it sounds a little bit defeatist, but it's probably true. It shouldn't surprise anybody, and I don't want to discourage anybody from training, but if you look at your mom and your dad, and they were pretty, I'll call them big people, chances are you're going to be a pretty big person or a bigger person. So the person, the set of genes that you're born with and everything else like that is gonna, I think, determine, I'll just call it the upper limit. Now, what it doesn't mean is, you're forever fated to look like your parents, because if your parents never lifted weights, who knows what your potential is. But just like I will never be a great marathoner. I have relatively mediocre physiology. I've done okay from a muscle mass perspective, but I'm not the biggest guy, and I was never the strongest guy either. As I've gotten older, I think because of my training, I've been able to sort of keep myself close to the top, but I'm not winning any powerlifting competitions, certainly not competing in any bodybuilding competitions either. But I do think that there's, a set of brackets around a person that's gonna, constrain the outer limits of what they can do. The good news is that no matter what, if you're consistent with your training, you can get to the outer limits. And I think that that's a really important point because in the way I look at social media, and you tell me whether my lens is wrong on this, people are heavily focused on optimization, which is awesome. Don't get me wrong. Like, who doesn't want to optimize? But the real truth is where you don't want to be is at the bottom.
Yeah.
it's not that being at the top isn't a laudable goal, but if you're in the second quartile or quintile, whatever, you're actually in pretty good shape.
Yeah.
But people who are at the bottom, particularly as we get older, those are the people like the curves, in sort of longevity and survival. It's quartile one, quartile two, just a little shave, but quartile four drops off the table. The bottom quartile, the bottom quintiles, the lowest 20 to 25%, they're in bad shape. They're in really bad shape. And so even if you can nudge yourself up to the next best, your chances of lowering your risk for chronic disease, disease-free survival, longevity, health span, it's a massive difference. And I mean massive. Like it's such a big difference. So it's not that, anybody goes into this game thinking, I just don't want to be last. You know, it's a terrible mentality. But from a health standpoint, that is literally one of the best things you could do for yourself. So if you're not gonna, maximize or optimize, it's okay because in doing something, you're miles ahead of the person who's doing nothing. And if you're doing something and you're doing more of something, obviously we know that there's sort of a dose response at which, and I always used to like the, squeezing the water out of the cloth. The last few drops, you got to work a lot, and you only get a few drops of water, and that's like the benefit, right?
Yeah.
But honestly, like getting there and doing it consistently, and you guys know people like Lane Norton, and he's fond of using this, but I'll paraphrase. You will be amazed at what you can accomplish. But to the point that I was making, Lisa, and it's not to, everybody's got a boundary. And so you might not look like the best, biggest, badass bodybuilder, but when you get in there and you do it consistently, what you're doing for your health, it might not show up in the mirror and everything else like that. But believe me, if there was the health meter, it's a big, big deal.
And the reason why I grabbed that quote off of one of your Facebook posts, it really rang home for me too as a coach because again, it says the biggest detriment to muscle growth specifically is what we were talking about there too. The biggest detriment isn't the program, it's the person. It makes me think, okay, with my clients, the biggest detriment, I can put together the perfect diet for somebody. It's the person and how well they're going to execute. It's how hard they will push in the gym versus people that are not. They're not going to have that discomfort. And then you just wrapped it up with something I wasn't even thinking about that's right there in front of all of us is that kind of genetic component or that ability to whatever you can achieve. And I think you summed that up perfectly by saying basically just be the best version of yourself that you can possibly
Absolutely.
be. Right.
Yeah.
And I think in this world where we're all comparing ourselves to everyone else
Uh,
nonstop 24/7, it's so unhealthy.
yeah,
I think we lose sight of that. Such a powerful message with so many different meanings there. Um, we've got a few more really good questions and then we'll wrap up. Lisa, what
sure.
else do we have left?
Yeah, here we just basically wanted to hear what sort of impact you want to leave at the end of your career, or basically at the end, when it's all
Yeah.
said and done, what's your main mission?
Um, I'll be honest. I can see that end of my career. I'm a lot closer to that than I am to that end. So I do think a little bit about this. Maybe I don't know if it's healthy or unhealthy. Yeah. Look, I mean, I think such a core part of who I am and what the message I've been trying to get out is that, and I've mused a little bit over this, and that everybody knows we know so much more about aerobic exercise and its health benefits because of guys like Ken Cooper. I mean, before Ken Cooper, we didn't know what the term aerobics was. And the Cooper longitudinal aerobic study has been foundational in our understanding of what aerobic exercise contributes to health and why it's such a big part of our physical activity guidelines. But in everybody's physical activity guidelines around the world, there's also and 2 days a week of strengthening exercise. When you look at people's self-reported participation in the physical activity guidelines, first of all, we're not doing a great job. That's the 150 minutes of aerobic that everybody talks about. When we look at how much strengthening work people are doing, it's even more miserable. And that's self-report. And so I want to give everybody the benefit of the doubt and say they're being totally honest. Usually people they cheat a little bit. And some of the activities that are called strengthening are things like gardening,
Yeah.
under some definitions. And I'm like, man, if you're into gardening, like it's a fine form of, getting outside, being physically, not, I wouldn't say super physically active, but definitely not being sedentary, but it's not strengthening work, at least as any of us would define it. And I've become more and more convinced based on data, based on my own observations of, 500 community clients that come to our facilities, the studies we do, the older people who are stronger are so much more resilient. They're buffered against all kinds of issues from a health standpoint, from a mobility standpoint. So, if I had a mission and walked away and somebody said, Stu Phillips helped help get the strengthening guidelines be more part of the regular conversation than they were, I'd be like, I can live with that. That's cool. That'd be a great legacy. I would love to. I'm not. I don't need to be the person because I know I'm never going to be the person. There's no Ken Cooper of lifting. Um, but you get my point, right? Like I just want for people to realize how important it is to be strong as they get older, and not that the 150 minutes a week isn't important, but at some point in everybody's life as they get older, what will limit them in terms of an activity of daily living will be a strength and power related activity. It's not going to be your aerobic stuff. It'll be something as simple as getting up and out of a chair. And, once you
Yeah.
can't do that, your world gets pretty small and the people who need to care for you goes up in number quite a bit.
Yeah, that's absolutely outstanding. I think of people too as later the things you're doing now are definitely impacting people as they age, but this kind of information that's kind of pushing us ahead, we're going to have people in their 20s that are going to be consuming some of the content and the research that you've put together that are in their 40s and 50s that's going to be impact them when they're 80 and we're all long gone, right? So like this
Yeah.
is legacy
And
this is
it's a
that gives me
massive pay it
goosebumps.
forward investment, right? It's
It
it's
is.
it's compound interest. That's the best analogy I've got is the early investment in this stuff is literally you're miles ahead of anybody. So, you guys are preaching the good word. I appreciate the opportunity to, come on your show and you let me soapbox about so many things that I'm really very passionate about. But yeah, it's important.
Yeah, speaking of important, our show notes, we have all of Dr. Phillips' contact information. We've got an email on here. I highly suggest you follow him on Instagram, Facebook, search for him on YouTube. Am I missing anything that we have here that people can get a hold of you? Because this information will
I
make you
I
better.
think you have everything. I think you have everything. I'm on TikTok too, but I'm on there just to piss my youngest son off because he told me about a year ago, he goes, old people should not be on TikTok. I'm like, screw you, man. Get on. I said, look, I'm on Dad's on TikTok now. And he was like, "Oh," so yeah. So I haven't posted on TikTok and I don't even really know how it works, to be honest with you. So
Yeah. Well, your content on Facebook and Instagram and the interviews and things that you do on YouTube, like all those are top notch. And of course, we've got your email
appreciate that.
listed here. Thanks so much for the time for myself and Lisa. We're out of here. See you guys.